they shove off into the harbor and slip beyond those iconic final traces of home, just as they did as scared young men more than 70 years ago. Ahead, 3,000 miles of blue water, and the lasting memory of the terrifying first time they made this very journey.
Quite an experience for a 20-year-old kid.
To fulfill the mission of saving the world.
If that bullet would have been just a half-inch further, it would have gotten me right in the head.
Tonight, we travel with the heroes of World War II.
All you want and your thought is, just let me get home as close to one piece as I can.
As they retrace their path to battle and recount their voyage to victory.
Let me take you back 74 years. Our company went into the Bulge with about 200 men. We came out with about 50.
So that no one loses sight of what it took to chart history's course. Not long ago, Cunard and a veterans charity called the Greatest Generations Foundation had an idea. What if they loaded up the Queen Mary II, the world's only ocean liner currently in service, with the heroes of World War II?
In January of 2017, Timothy Davis, Tim, of the Greatest Generations Foundation, the founder and president, he reached out to Cunard and told us about the foundation's mission of taking the veterans back to their various areas where they served, and was very interested in bringing a group back on Queen Mary II.
This relationship with Cunard is an historic relationship. Not only are we reliving history, but we're recreating it with these men who are at the end of their lives, coming back on one last journey to remember their brothers, sisters, in this case, their mothers, who sailed on the Queen Mary after World War II.
It's a perfect fit. After all, this is the very same mode of transportation that tens of thousands of young soldiers took to war 75 years ago.
As many people know, Cunard was very instrumental in World War II when our famous ships, the Queen Mary, the Queen Elizabeth, were commissioned as troop ships and transported troops back and forth during the war.
Crammed into ship decks by the thousands, young GIs like Jack Foy crossed the Atlantic on luxury liners, often painted battleship gray and converted into troop transports.
There were 15,000 men aboard that ship. If you can imagine 15,000 aboard the ship. I slept in the swimming pool, the first class swimming pool, of course. And I believe the bunks were 8 or 9, stacked 8 or 9 high, which wasn't too bad unless the guy above you got sick. And quite frankly, most of the GIs on the boat got sick at one time or another.
This is the way nearly 1 million young enlisted men traveled to Europe, bound for war.
And Winston Churchill actually credited Cunard with ending the war 1 year early because of that effort.
75 years later, those heroes of World War II are crossing the Atlantic aboard a Cunard ship once again. Their moves may not show it, but some of these heroes are pushing 100 years old. Their first time at sea a lifetime ago. But their bodies are still able, and their minds still razor sharp. And their stories, enough to pack a cruise ship theater each and every day at sea for a question and answer session as history buffs listen to history makers.
My mother and my father were both in World War I.
People like 95-year-old Army medic Peter Dupre. A harmonica has helped him heal the wounds of war. He helped treat some of the 75,000 soldiers wounded in the Battle of the Bulge.
We used to say to the soldier, you took the bullets and we took them out.
In the years since World War II, he's played his harmonica at sports arenas, Nashville studios, and on national TV, always to awestruck crowds. Crowds also gathering to listen to Stephen Melnikoff, who turns 100 years old soon. He's a man who casts a giant shadow. Part of the famous 29th Infantry, he took part in the D-Day invasion, just 24 years old when he stormed Omaha Beach. Days later, he was shot by a German soldier in a hedgerow in Normandy.
I was hit in the neck by automatic fire. Almost every field that we took, we lost men. We had casualties. We had 20,000 casualties.
And passengers mesmerized by the story of Frank DeVita, who served in both Europe and the Pacific aboard the USS Samuel Chase.
Our boats looked like shredded wheat from the machine gun.
He was assigned to one of these Higgins boats on D-Day, transporting soldiers to Omaha Beach. His job was to drop the ramp at the front of the boat. It was the only thing separating Allied troops from the deadly machine gun fire coming at them. He got his orders from the boat's captain.
And he said to me, drop the ramp. And I'll be honest with you, I never heard him because the guns were going off. The machine gun was peppering our boat. I never heard him. So the second time he yelled out to me, drop the ramp. I was a kid of 19 years old. I just came out of high school. And I knew in my mind, when I dropped that ramp, I wouldn't make another day, I'd be dead. Because the machine guns that were hitting the ramp, which was made out of steel, when the ramp went down, the machine gun bullets would come in. So I didn't drop the ramp immediately. Then he yelled out for the third time. Excuse my language again. He says, damn, DeVita, drop the effing ramp. So I dropped the ramp. I had 30 men on my boat. 3 of them got out. 27 men either died or were wounded. And I'll tell you, I was a basket case. I was a young kid. So now when these guys died, the ramp was down. Some of them fell on the ramp. They were dead. And I couldn't pull the ramp up. So I went down to the ramp, myself and another guy that was on the boat with me. And we dragged I was 125 pounds. And I took these guys, they were dead weight because they had bullets in them. They were soaking wet from the water. I don't know where I got the strength. But we pulled them off the ramp, the dead bodies, and pulled them into the boat. And then I got the ramp up.
For a teenager, there was a lot to take in, and the war was far from over for him. His ship took part in Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France, and just a few months after that, he was headed to the Pacific theater of war, though he did get some shore leave to go back to Brooklyn to visit his mother. She was at church when he got there.
So I ran to the church, and there was a group of women in a semicircle, and my mom had her back to me. But the people that were facing me, when I walked in and I was in uniform, they started pointing like that to me, right? My mother didn't know what was happening. She turned around. She saw me, fainted dead away. Fainted dead away. I thought I killed my mother.
Frank DeVita never said anything about his time at war or about what happened on D-Day until 5 years ago.
For the 70th anniversary, my wife and I wanted to go back to Omaha Beach. Unfortunately, my wife passed away before we got to go. And my son says, you know, I'll go with your dad. And then my daughter says, I'll go. Well, to make the long story short, 33 of my family honored me. And I took 33 people to the beach at Omaha.
In an interview on the beach, he was asked about a big scrapbook that held all of his World War II memories.
And my kid said, what book? For 70 years, I never talked about it. When I was interviewed on the beach, that was the very first time after 70 years that I opened up and I talked about it. It was the big load off my chest, you know. And then I wanted to talk about it more.
And that's just what he does. He shares his story all over the world. including right here for this captivated cruise ship crowd, a story his family didn't even know for 7 decades.
Because I don't want them never to forget.
The first time he made this trek across the Atlantic Ocean, Battle of the Bulge survivor Jack Foy and his shipmates had no idea what they were in for.
19, 20, 21 years of age. We're just kids. And they threw us right into the worst battle that our country has ever seen.
Fighting without winter coats in minus 10-degree temperatures, the month-long battle claimed 19,000 lives, including some of Jack's closest friends, and he's still haunted by what he saw and heard there.
Sometimes in the middle of the night, I'm woken up by artillery barrages. You look for my wife to shield me from the memories, but she's gone now. These mounds of snow, each mound covers an American soldier. They were our friends. Many of them with their arms and legs raised aloft through the snow, seemingly begging us not to forget them. And we swear we never will forget them.
And while he doesn't call those disturbing memories PTSD,
bodies laying everywhere.
Jim Blaine has no doubt that's exactly what he suffers from. A Marine who fought on Iwo Jima, he can still recall in vivid detail crippling memories, like the time he watched a friend die.
When my group came ashore, which was 3 days later, we had a meeting set up over by the No. 2 airfield. And we kind of gathered around, and I was standing next to George Papernak. And they had these spider traps all over the island where they could poke their head out and shoot a mortar shell anywhere they wanted to. Well, sure enough, we're standing there and we heard the hiss of this mortar. Well, I ran over there. I ran away about 5 or 6 feet, and the other guys spread out, but we didn't have enough time to get away from it. And George went down, but that mortar hit him right in the middle of the back. And he took the brunt of the explosion of that thing, and there hardly was nothing left of him to bury.
The day Jim was discharged from the Marines, and every day since, he's known something was wrong.
And I did my best to suppress it. I took up liquor, of course.
Nothing seemed to help, not even the VA. Without his wife of 64 years, Jim doesn't think he would have made it.
I think she saved my life.
Now, finally, Jim is getting the help for PTSD that he needed for years.
Is it a hard thing for a Marine to admit there's something wrong with me?
Of course. Doesn't happen to Marines. Oh, really? Now, I go to a therapy class, and every Monday there's 20 of us in that class. It's a group therapy meeting. There's only 2 World War II guys in there. All the rest of them are Vietnam. Now, I hate to miss those meetings, but I'd rather be here with you guys. Anyway.
And every one of these World War II veterans is glad Jim Blaine is still among them. He's living proof it's never too late to get the help you need.
I'm still dealing with it today, but it's permanent, it's incurable. But with the proper people to work with you and medication, you can handle it.
Crossing the ocean, just like so many soldiers did 75 years ago, takes about a week these days. Aboard the Queen Mary II, plenty of time to share war stories. And on the last day of our crossing, we invited all 12 World War II veterans to answer questions about their service. Veterans like Richard Ramsey, who served aboard the USS Nevada. He was there on D-Day.
We had the honor of firing the first rounds that started the invasion of the entire war.
And Stu Headley, who was there when the U.S. entered World War II. His presence at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, is forever part of his legacy. But a bigger part is the example he set for his family.
My son joined the Marine Corps and ended up in the Vietnam War. came home, went to college, and he's a contractor today.
What's it like to send a child off to war once you've been there yourself?
I'll tell you the truth, I prayed for him that he didn't have to go to Vietnam, and he ended up in Okinawa making up the battle orders.
Answered prayers. They are what many on this stage credit for keeping them alive during the war, and some in the crowd feel the same way too.
But liberation was a great time. We all said, "Victory, Joe, Victory, Joe," while you were in your weapon carrier throwing Hershey bar, Tootsie Roll, baby. It was the biggest thing, you know. So I really, really cannot thank you well enough.
This woman was just a little girl in the Philippines when enemy troops occupied her country. Men like these liberated her family.
So I thank you all from the very bottom of my heart. You really are heroes. You really are heroes.
I just think that a lot of the civilian population suffered probably more than some of the military did. And all I can say is that many of the veterans that are on this stage right now have experienced more consistent combat than what I did. But the combat that I did experience was enough to last a lifetime.
Unfortunately, combat didn't end for U.S. veterans when World War II did.
It's been an experience of a lifetime.
Just ask Bill Hutton and Eddie Niederberger, Vietnam veterans who escorted these World War II heroes aboard the Queen Mary II.
These guys are walking history. To be around them, how we've been all week. And I mean, I hadn't met any of them before the beginning of this little excursion. World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq. The bond that there is no age difference in the bond. The bond is unique throughout all the generations, what we have with them. But these guys are they're walking history. It's incredible.
Incredible enough to raise a glass to as a thank you for a week together at sea, a lifetime of service and sacrifice.
Thank you, gentlemen, for everything that you've done. Cheers. Cheers.
It is painful to realize, as each of these World War II heroes approaches a century on Earth, they are in the sunset of their lives, which makes it all the more crucial that we hear their stories and share them every chance we get. And that's exactly what Cunard and the Greatest Generations Foundation remain committed to.
I personally have probably hosted 20 crossings through my career, and it was arguably the most powerful and special experience I've ever had. To say that the reception to the gentlemen on this crossing has been amazing is an understatement, and I think everyone has really been very moved by the experience.
This partnership with Cunard is a unique experience for not just people who feel like you and I, they believe strongly that this is the right thing to do, to pay homage to those that fought and served our great nations during the Second World War.
This May, Cunard and the Greatest Generations Foundation are crossing the Atlantic once again to mark the 75th anniversary of the D-Day invasions. To take part in this historic crossing, visit Cunard.com.